Okay, today we're going to be talking about the medieval period, Jewish mysticism. There are three main parts of medieval Jewish life that we're going to be talking about in this session and the next one. There is what we're going to call normal mysticism. That's like what you would call just normal religion, mainstream religion, which means that you pray. That is, for somebody who's an atheist, all religious stuff just about is mystical. The idea that there is another power, that there's God, that's already mystical. But it's what most of us would call normal mysticism. To pray in a synagogue or a church or a mosque is a normal kind of activity. And the big word is communion. That is, not as in Catholicism, but you communicate with God. You're part of a community and you communicate with God and God communicates with you. But this kind of mysticism that we're going to be talking about today is called radical Jewish mysticism, which is different. So it might be easier not to talk about normal mysticism and radical mysticism in medieval Jewry. It might be better to just talk about sort of mainstream religion and radical mysticism. And the third will be, and we'll talk about this next time, will be medieval Jewish philosophy. And I'll go again into these three kinds of medieval Jewish thought next time. But for today, I want you to look at this map. And this map is a crazy thought, and it will be more striking the more you know about religion and Judaism. This is a map of God. The idea is that God has 10 parts. Now, if there's one thing that Judaism's known for, is that there is one God. And yet this is going to talk about God having 10 parts. And at the top is Keter, which means the crown. It's the beginning. It's nothingness and everythingness, if there's such a word. That is, God began from this point of light. It's almost like a Big Bang kind of thing in physics. And you have these different sphirot. Sphirot are spheres, different aspects of God. So let me look at two right here. One is called Chesed and one is called Gevura. Sometimes God is loving and God is giving and God is soft and God is flexible. But then sometimes Gevura, God is strong and God is powerful and God is punishing. And there are both. One of the radical ideas of radical Jewish mysticism is that it's up to human beings to balance God. That is, think about a parent. A parent who is only strict, only disciplinary, can be an abusive parent. A parent who is only giving, who's only loving, who only wants to be their kid's best friend, that kid will probably turn out to be a selfish brat. And because there's no balance. Balance is the key word. But not just the human beings have to be balanced, and parents have to be balanced, and we have to be balanced in our own lives, but God has to be balanced. What happens if God's not balanced? You can have a plague. You can have a tsunami. You can have a hurricane. In this way of thinking, and again, this is not mainstream Judaism, but in this radical way of thinking in the Middle Ages, God had to be balanced. Now, how does God get balanced? What balances God? Here comes the next radical part. It's up to human beings to pray and to make God balanced. Let's say that you have a best friend or a significant other, and you go off tilt, right? You're in a mood, you're too angry, you're too this, you're too that, and that friend brings you back to your balance. We all hopefully have people like that in our lives to sort of bring us back to an even keel. Well, human beings, mysticism says, are those beings that balance God. And how do we do this? That if a Jewish person lights the Sabbath candle, if any person does a good deed, these things help to balance God. Now, that's a different way of thinking about human beings and a different way of thinking about God. The idea that you have chesed, love, and gevura, power and punishment, and these things have to be balanced. First of all, is saying God is in one, he has these different moods. What is he, like a moody parent? But God has to be balanced too. And this is a way of explaining something that we've talked about. Why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? When God is not balanced and he's not controlling what's going on, that's when these kinds of things happen. It's a very different answer. Jewish mysticism grew out of the aftermath of one of the traumatic events of Jewish history. Modern people know about the Holocaust, but there was something called the Spanish Inquisition in 1492, a date that you'll recognize, and it's not a coincidence, that Columbus left in 1492 from Spain. And so trying to explain how could these terrible things have happened to the Jewish people? How could they have been burned at the stake? How could they have been exiled? In order to understand a world where God had let that happen, they came up with this system of, well, it's because God was not balanced. And why was God not balanced? Because we had not done our part. Let's try it from a different way. I want to ask one kind of Kabbalah, and Kabbalah, K-E-B-B-A-L-A-H, is what Jewish mysticism is called. It means to receive, to bring things down from the past, a tradition. That wasn't really true. This wasn't bringing things down. It was creating a whole new kind of Judaism. But Kabbalah, in this book called the Zohar, Z-O-H-A-R, which means the Enlightenment, which was written by a guy named Moses de Leon, Moses, and new word D-E, and then new word L-E-O-N. Moses de Leon was trying to come up with a system to explain what had happened in their lives and to explain God and to explain what has happened to human beings. And so here is the system. Next radical part, some of these aspects are male and some of these aspects are female. And the male and the female have to be in harmony. Now think about what we're saying. In a system, a religious system like Judaism, which always talked about God as male, now we're talking about God being both male and female, and those parts have to be balanced. So you see with every sentence I'm saying how different this is from anything else that we've talked about in Jewish history. To go down a little bit to this one here, Shekhinah, that is the female presence of God in our lives. It's that aspect of God that you feel. If you're a religious person, if you've ever felt God's presence, the mystics would say this is the part of God that you felt, not all those higher parts. And Shekhinah is like a covering, like almost a blanket over us, protecting us, taking care of us. And it's very mothering. It's very nurturing, and it's very female in this way of thinking. So there's a lot about male and female, but again, we're talking about God and balancing the male and female. In a certain way, if you think about it, even though this was happening 1100s, 1200 CE, right, 800 years ago, it's very modern. The way we think about gender today, the progress we've made in understanding about he and she and they, and people finding their own gender identities and things like that. Look at this. 800 years ago, nobody talked like this. And they were talking about, we all have male and female in us. Even God has male and female in us. It's really quite remarkable. Then what happens is that the Zohar goes through many passages that you'll have on the screen, and they say we have to look at the Torah differently. We have to reinterpret it. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to be looking at a couple of passages. Here's one that you'll recognize from when we talked about creation. We talked about how there was light created on the first day, but the sun was not created, and the sun and the moon and the stars were not created till the fourth day. How could that be? What was that light? And they take that opportunity to say, there's a light that helped to create the world, and that was at the beginning. But then God hid it away, and someday we'll get that light back. It's a very beautiful way. It comes from a question that we had when we studied Genesis 1 and 2, and now here's a new interpretation of it. Again, male and female. Think about this, and it goes back to something that we studied when we studied Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 about the creation story. We saw how males and females were created in chapter 1, and then there was the story of Adam and how it was only later that Eve was created. They saw the same things that we saw in class, that we wrote a paper about. But they came up with a different answer. They said God initially created one human being who was both male and female, sort of back to back, male this way and female that way, something like that. And then when God took that being and put him/her asleep, and then didn't take a rib out of Adam, but split the sides, so that now you have male and female, and with the idea being that we are half of that being. And the beautiful romantic kind of thing that has been passed down from this is that then we have to find that other half in our lives. So that's another beautiful passage. Here's a passage about Noah. Noah comes out from the ark. And again, this is not in the Bible. These are interpretations of the Bible, and they're interpretations of things that were sort of questions that remained after you read the Bible. And they take the questions and turn them into beautiful answers. So here's another one. Noah comes out after the ark, and how did he feel? Think about being Noah. You come off the ark, you're happy to be alive, you've got your family, you got the animals, all that's good, but everybody else is destroyed. You're the last family on earth, and all of a sudden you say to God, how could you do that? How could you destroy the world? And God says, now you say something? Now you say something? Right? I came to you and I told you I was going to send a flood. I told you to build the ark. You didn't say a word. You just went and built that ark. You didn't say anything to anybody else. Now, after the fact, you come to me and you scream it and you say that I'm not good, that I shouldn't have done this. Where were you before? And this is contrasted with the first Jewish person, Abraham. You'll remember the story. It's Genesis 18. And God says, I'm going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says, how can you do that? What if there's 10 good people? What if there's 30 good people? How can you destroy the good with the evil? How can you do that collateral damage? Aren't you the judge of the world? Shouldn't you do justly? So Abraham stood up against God and what he considered to be God's injustice. And this is contrasted here with Noah. Remember that Abraham's the first Jewish person. Noah was not Jewish. Neither were Adam nor Eve. And so Noah is saying, how can you do this? And God says, where were you before? You should have said something before. And not that it would have made a difference, but it's talking about sometimes in our lives, we say something and it's too little and it's much too late. And we should have said something before when we actually could have done something. So that's another passage. All of these passages are also taking on a different mystical level. And so Abraham becomes the soul in another passage. And still another one, Abraham goes down to Egypt. And it's a beautiful passage. This is Genesis chapter 12. Abraham goes down to Egypt, and then he comes back. And so they say, well, why did he have to do that? And the lesson here is sometimes we have to go through bad stuff to understand things. I think that some of you will understand this. It's the experiences, the tough experiences we go through in life. It's the suffering we go through that lead us to real insight, that lead us to real empathy for other people. And so there's an incredible passage in William Butler Yeats where he says, you cannot be whole until you're rent, until you're torn. Until you've been torn, you cannot become whole again. And here's this idea that Abraham had to go down to Egypt. The Jewish people would have to go down to Egypt. They'd have to be slaves in order to come out and to say, right, now I know what it means to suffer. And now I know what it means to be poor, to be oppressed, to be downtrodden. And so now the foundation of Judaism becomes, you have to care about the poor and the homeless and the downtrodden and the oppressed. That's another passage. One of the toughest passages in the Bible is Genesis 22 about how Abraham is told is commanded to sacrifice Isaac on the mountain, and we talked about why that would be. The Zohar, the mysticism, comes up with its own interpretation, quite remarkable, that Abraham had a big party for Isaac, which it does say in the Bible, but then they add that the accuser, you might remember Hasatan, from the book of Job, the accusing angel comes and dressed as a poor person, and they don't let him into the party. And so that's why Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son, because he didn't care about the poor. Again, not in the Bible, but a remarkable interpretation, and one which teaches us a lesson. You have some big party. What are you doing for the poor? How are you caring about the poor? So these are all examples of how mysticism works. And in the interest of time, I'll skip through this one. And actually, I'm gonna talk about two more. This one I love very much. The idea is that every day is judging you. That is, you're living a day of your life. And as you're at the end of the day, that day, I don't know what today is, April something, April 14th or 15th, whatever it is, goes up to God and says, okay, here's how Skolnick did on April 14th. And if I had a good day, if I did good deeds, that becomes a light. And if I didn't, it doesn't become a light. Someday, I hope when I'm 120 or so and I pass away, I'll go to God, hopefully, and there'll be a garment. And if I had a lot of good days, the garment will be full of all these lights for all of those days that I did well. But for all those days that I didn't well, there'll be holes. And so the question is, am I going to have a garment full of light, or am I going to have a garment that's like in tatters, full of holes? And the reason I cherish this passage so much is it's made me think about every day in a different way. What did I do today? How did I live today? Did I live today well? And I don't think I ever thought about individual days in that way. It makes every day important. And that has really changed the way I think about life. And it comes from this passage of interpreting about Jacob in the Bible. And the last one I'll talk about is it talks about a rabbi, and he's about to pass away. And all of his younger rabbis and students are all around him, and they're crying because he's going to die. And he says, take it easy, right? And he says, don't think in terms of a funeral, think about a wedding celebration. That my soul is going to be reunited with God. I'm going to be I'm going to become part of God. Don't be so upset, right? I am reuniting the way that I'd be uniting with my spouse at a wedding celebration. Again, a whole different way of thinking about things. That I would never think about it this way, but that, and so what happens at the end of this passage is that his soul, lifts up and he goes back to God, and then everybody realizes that they shouldn't be so upset, that he's going to be okay because he's going back to God, and he always loved God, and now he'll be with God. So this is a short introduction to Jewish mysticism. The key points are there are these 10 spheres, 10 different parts of God. They have to be harmonized. If they're not, we're all in trouble. And also that this mysticism goes through and reinterprets a lot of passages in the Bible in very different ways. So that's a short introduction to Jewish mysticism. And next time I'll be talking about a little bit more about medieval Jewish philosophy, and again about sort of normal religion in the Middle Ages.